Revelation 3129. From the 22nd of May 1944. Many are called, few are chosen. Many are called, but only a few are chosen. The calling as well as the election certainly depends on God's grace, but this grant of grace is also determined by the will of the human being himself, whether he is receptive to it, that is whether he makes himself worthy of an extraordinary influx of divine grace. God has called all people to eternal beatitude, and yet it depends on the will of the individual that he is worthy of it. Thus all people can feel called, but it is up to them how they decide. There is no coercion from above, just as no preferential treatment of the individual effortlessly helps him to ascend, but every extraordinary influx of grace is only the result of the will which is seriously turned towards God and endeavors to fulfill divine will. Then God's love takes hold of him and strengthens and promotes him through an abundant influx of gifts of grace which bring about his perfection. And these are the chosen ones. They are his own who are constantly allowed to receive grace from him because they want to receive it and constantly ask for it. Thus, the human being's will is absolutely necessary for him to be chosen, yet no one can say that he is not also called on this earth. For since he lives on earth for the purpose of his higher development, God himself has called him to walk the path upwards, and he also makes his grace available to him for this purpose. However, very few people pay attention to their calling, that is, they only live their lives in a purely earthly way and ignore the actual calling. God cannot choose people from among them, for to bestow an abundance of grace upon them, against their will, would mean an inevitable higher development which has no value if the being thereby loses its free will. Yet God needs servants on earth who are to help those who disregard their calling. And he can only choose them from the circle of those who, of their own free will, make themselves worthy of an extraordinary allocation of grace, who therefore use the measure of grace they receive and through their prayer can make use of a constant supply of grace. Among these, therefore, he chooses his laborers and equips them with extraordinary strength. These are the chosen ones who always and constantly receive grace but who have first surrendered their will to God, who have voluntarily complied with the calling and always used the supply of grace for their spiritual progress. The first are called, even without their will, yet they do not follow the call. These, however, are likewise called by God and offer no resistance, but there are only a few whom God can now consider so extraordinary that they can be regarded as God's chosen ones. There are only a few who allow themselves to be chosen by God, who strive towards him with all their senses and can therefore also receive gifts of grace in abundance, so that they become children of the Father and can enter his kingdom. Amen.